everyone. I'm Tanya Rivero. We have breaking news on the Jordan Neely subway chokehold trial.
Daniel Penny has been found not guilty of criminally negligent homicide. The jury deliberated for more than 24 hours across 5 days before reaching this verdict. We got Lauren Glassberg live outside the courthouse right now with the very latest. Lauren.
Well, David and Tanya, I can tell you there was a loud outburst when this verdict was read in the courtroom coming from relatives of Jordan Neely. And we understand that there's a increased police presence outside the courthouse, which is just behind me. You can't see the officers, but about 10 minutes ago, the officers moved in to secure the scene from the threat of possible protest, because this case did touch off a hot debate about race, about mental illness, about drug use and public safety issues. But we understand now this jury of 12 has decided that to acquit the defendant Daniel Penny in this case. He had first been charged with 2 counts, manslaughter and then criminally negligent homicide. But that first count was dismissed on Friday by the judge, and the jury was considering this morning that lesser count that could bring up to 4 years in prison. But the jury has acquitted him of that. This, of course, stems to a chokehold that Daniel Penny placed on Jordan Neely back on a subway in May of 2023. Neely entered that subway car. He was agitated, and by all accounts, he was making threats to riders. And then, of course, Penny is a former Marine. He stood up, and as he told police, he was just trying to protect people. He put Neely in a chokehold and held that hold for nearly 6 minutes. The prosecution had said that hold had caused Neely to die, but Penny maintained all along that, of course, he had no intent. He was just trying to protect riders. And today, that is what the jury found, that there was no intent, no recklessness. And in the case of negligent homicide, the lower standard, there was no blameworthy conduct on Penny's part. So we will be watching to see what happens here outside the courtroom and following all the latest. We are live with this breaking story in Lower Manhattan. Lauren Glassberg, Channel 7 Eyewitness News.
And Lauren, before we let you go, we know you've been covering this trial for a while. This jury has been deliberating for 24 hours across 5 days. As you said, they couldn't reach a verdict on the earlier charge. Did you get a sense by what the jury was asking to revisit in terms of evidence, where they were having trouble, seeing eye to eye?
Yeah, I mean, not clear if they were hung up on the self-defense aspect of this or initially on the manslaughter charge. Was there a degree of recklessness? Did Daniel Penny know what he was doing was reckless and could have caused death? And then moving on to that lesser count of criminally negligent homicide, which the prosecution really just had to prove that there was blameworthy conduct and that he did not consider that his conduct would lead to risk or death. In this case, look, the jury acquitted him, so they did not find that there was blameworthy conduct. He stood up and tried to protect the riders in that subway car. At least some of the jurors found so, and they needed a unanimous verdict to convict. And that is where they are, on an acquittal.
Lauren, what about reaction from the Daniel Penny camp or the Jordan Neely camp?
Couldn't tell you at this point. I mean, this just came down minutes ago, so we're just bringing you the latest. But that initial response inside the courtroom by Neely's relatives, of course, they were upset by this verdict. They were hoping for a manslaughter conviction, and then they were hoping their best chance was for this criminally negligent homicide conviction, which they did not get. But of course, we will be talking to people in the coming hours about this case and what the fallout is. But again, you can hear police behind me, a police presence behind me at the courthouse, to ensure that if there are any protests as a result of this verdict, that they remain safe.
Lauren, stand by for us. We really appreciate having you there. We want to bring in an expert that we've been talking to for quite a while now, Franco, former FBI, former prosecutor. You know, we saw this case kind of heading in this direction last week when the jury could not, when it was a mistrial, basically, they could not agree on the top charge. What do you make of how we're at right now?
Yeah, you know, the fact that it came in this quick, it just is kind of an indication that the jury was it was kind of hung up on probably one issue on the manslaughter charge. But once they got to this point where it went down to blameworthiness, it appears that's where they may have made that call and just said, you know what, it was, you know, he did not have that blameworthiness issue, and they were just able to vote on it right away. I mean, this was a very quick verdict once they came back into the jury deliberation rooms. So it appears that this was the direction that they were going in last week, but they just couldn't get to that point, again, because of probably the difference in the charging documents provided by the judge.
So, you know, Rich, you've been around for a while. You'll probably remember the Bernard Goetz. A lot of New Yorkers obviously remember that. What are some of the parallels that you see here? And, you know, what are some of the major differences?
Yeah, in both cases, you know, it was crime on the subway, and an individual took it, you know, into his own hands to deal with that crime. In the Bernard Goetz case, it looks like he became, it wasn't that he was as much protecting people as he was dealing with the subjects, the criminals. In this one, it really looks like Daniel Penny got involved because he was doing so to protect innocent victims who were in the subway. And what he was doing was holding that person until that threat was done. He didn't take that aggressive step of pulling out a weapon, firing it, and stopping the attack that way. In this one, it was an ongoing attack, or a perceived ongoing attack by Daniel Penny and other people on the subway. And he took that step where, again, you know, the victim did pass away during the encounter, but it appears that was not the intent of Daniel Penny, was to cause injury. It was just to hold that victim until, or that person, until police could arrive.
Another quick follow-up to that question. Of course, the Bernard Goetz case happened in the 80s. There weren't as many cameras around. Not everybody had a cell phone taking video. Obviously, in this case, there was a lot of video. There was reaction from people on the train who had been there, who had seen both, you know, the situation before Daniel Penny held down Jordan Neely and after. You saw responses from some people saying, I was relieved. So how much do you think that all that video evidence played into this?
Oh, I think that video evidence is probably what, you know, made the decision, or is what the jurors relied on. They were able to see what happened prior to it, prior to the encounter, and during the encounter. They see Daniel Penny holding him down, and yes, I guess the victim in this was struggling, but he had been on the attack prior to that, and Daniel Penny was not becoming overly aggressive. It wasn't, you know, that he was, you know, applying more and more pressure. There were no punches thrown. He was just really holding him in that position. And I don't think if we had that video, the jurors would have known that. Right. Yes, Daniel could have testified to that, and other people could have testified. But video, I mean, you know, what is it? A picture's worth 1,000 words? Yeah. And you can see it in this.
Well, you know, there was more than 40 witnesses in this trial, plenty of evidence to show you what happened, that the jury looked directly, that was presented to them directly from both the prosecution and the defense. But this case lived outside the courtroom as well. It was a very highly talked about kind of a case that divided much of New York over time. And you got to wonder, does that play on, they're instructed not to pay attention to that, the jury, but how true is that? I mean, how much do you think part of what they heard outside the courtroom played a role in their decision?
You know, it's hard to tell. You know, that would come down to talking to each juror. They're instructed, you know, they're not supposed to, you know, listen, look, talk about this case. It was not a sequestered jury, so they did go home. I mean, it's almost impossible, I guess, in this day and age, not to come across something that would indicate one side or the other on this trial. But again, the judge instructed them that they were to do their best not to let that impede their decision making or influence their decision making. And in this case, I think they were able to go into the jury room, and they did it for several days. They definitely, it appears, did their duty. You know, they talked about the case, they deliberated about the case. They basically they couldn't come to an agreement for a long time on this case, and it looks like they were able to do so with the evidence. And again, as you said, in this case, there was a lot of evidence. You had the 40 witnesses, you had the videos. They were able to, in my opinion, rely on what was in the court as opposed to.
But we're having a little trouble with your audio there, Rich, but to David's earlier point, there were a lot of unsuccessful petitions by Penny's lawyers to declare a mistrial over all the protests that you're talking about.
Yeah, Rich, we're going to ask you to just hang on for a second. We have Darla Miles, Eyewitness News reporter Darla Miles, who was in the courtroom when that verdict was handed down. Darla, I'm curious to hear what the reaction was like from both sides.
Very emotional. There was a loud outburst, David, as soon as the not guilty verdict was read. Lots of cheers for Daniel Penny, as there were supporters for Penny in the courtroom, as well as the Neely family. Shortly after that, you could hear profanity-laced expressions from Neely's father. He has been in this trial, every single day since it started November 1st, and there have been times when you heard him muttering under his breath, attempts to paint Jordan Neely as a seethingly angry person. So this is not necessarily a surprise that you would hear from Jordan Neely's father that he was upset about it. Security had to surround part of the courtroom because not just Neely's father, but other Neely supporters stood up. Again, lots of outbursts of anger. And in fact, Daniel Penny had to be escorted out of a rear exit just because at one moment there were cheers, there were jeers, a lot of emotion, and it was very tense inside when that verdict was read.
Right. Well, Darla, despite anyone's feelings about the verdict and how this ended up, obviously, at the end of the day, Jordan Neely is dead. He has family and loved ones who are, in pain over this. He was someone who suffered from mental illness, who needed help. So there is, definitely a sense of tragedy here, no matter where you fall on this verdict.
It's certainly a sense of tragedy, especially when you think about Jordan Neely. His mother was brutally murdered by her boyfriend when he was a kid, when he was a teenager. That boyfriend then defended himself in trial, cross-examining Jordan Neely after being accused and convicted of killing Christine Neely and leaving her body in a suitcase on the Henry Hudson Parkway in the Bronx. So that was the beginning of his trauma. His family tried to help him. We heard from his uncle, who is also here on a daily basis, who said they tried to get him support, but he just kind of devolved into this homelessness, but really found joy in being a Michael Jackson impersonator. But on the flip side, you really have the legal side of this case, the justification defense, which is clearly what the jury bought into here, because Daniel Penny's heart was in the right place. At the time, he was defending the other strap hangers. And if you remember, just a week prior, that was after the Frank James incident in Brooklyn when he started shooting on the subway. So this was it was a tense time when this incident happened. Now, interestingly enough, the Frank James case was not entered. It was not discussed by the defense in this case, but the Penny family, his mother testified, his sister testified. None of them came to court at all. But there's tragedy on both sides, to your point.